As the war and possible solutions to it are discussed in other parts of the world, the results of the North Vietnamese offensive are an unforgettable reality here in South Vietnam. Long after the fighting stops, as it surely eventually will, all of this will remain part of the long heritage of the Vietnam War. Ron Miller, ABC News, My Chon.
The Vietnam War began in 1954 and ended with the fall of Saigon in 1975. It was also known as the Second Indochina War, a part of a larger regional conflict known as the Indochina Wars. After the French lost control of Vietnam, the country divided into the North and the South, the North Vietnamese under a communist government and the South under an anti-communist government. The United States, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, and Thailand aided South Vietnam with the intent of preventing the spread of communism. Ho Chi Minh led the North Vietnamese with the support of the Soviet Union, China, and other communist allies. Viet Cong, also known as the National Liberation Front, was a group in South Vietnam that also supported the Northern Vietnamese government. The war took place in Indochina, a region in Southeast Asia that included Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and Laos. In 1973, after 19 years of warfare, President Nixon had the U.S. retreat from Vietnam after losing 58,000 of their troops. The Paris Peace Accords was signed, but each side kept violating the agreement. Fights broke out until the North managed to capture the South's capital, Saigon, in 1975, 2 years after the U.S.'s withdrawal. This marked the end of the war, totaling up to over 3 million deaths.
1.1 million North Vietnamese and Viet Cong soldiers, 200,000 to 250,000 South Vietnamese soldiers, and 58,000 U.S. troops were lost in the smoke of warfare. Along with the many millions of deaths, about 1 million refugees were killed as well, while attempting to flee to safety. In the midst of these dark hours, 3 young guerrillas fought for their country despite the fact that they were too young to be battling in war.
Though many consider the war a tragedy, another perspective might counter that. The war costed far too many lives, but it also gave life. 1 million refugees were able to escape the wastelands of Vietnam and were given an opportunity to live a life that would have been stolen from them if not saved. They were sent to better countries such as Germany, America, and Australia. The United States supported South Vietnam in the war to prevent the spread of communism. The U.S. believed in the domino theory. If one Southeast Asian country fell to communism, the rest would fall with them. As time passed, their role became vital. Protests were held all over the country, demanding that the U.S. would withdraw from the war, as it seems they were fighting only for corrupt dictatorship. Finally, in 1973, President Nixon decided to withdraw, and the last U.S. soldier left Vietnam after a total of 58,000 American lives were lost.
The Vietnam War is known as one of the most tragic events in history. With its staggering death toll, many might see it anything but a triumph. Though a different perspective, however, may prove otherwise. 3 million lives may have been lost, but 1 million were saved. 1 million were given a life they couldn't have if they stayed in Vietnam. We interviewed a Vietnamese refugee, Hoan Nguyen. He was one of the boat people who sailed overseas into the Philippines with little food and little chance to survive. However, as Vietnam was a poor country then, they might not have had the most luxurious childhood. Now, living in the U.S. with their own families and a new life, they might actually be grateful that the war happened.
I was 20 years old when my mom told me to leave Vietnam. So what I did was that guy who going to guide me to go from Ho Chi Minh City all the way to the southern tip of Vietnam. There I got there like at night, and then during the nighttime, we crossed the border to Cambodia. And I never been to that area before. It was my first time leaving the house, going to that south side. And then when I was crossing the border, the next morning I'm on the Cambodian side. We got into a boat. It's very dark. It's just going over the river, I remember. And then from there, I was in Cambodia for probably a whole week. That going, from one place to the other, that we go toward the border of Thailand. And again, after a week passed, I crossed the border again from Cambodia to Thailand. Yeah. And then we couldn't make it to the land, so we are stranded from island to islands. So we've been to the island for about 8-9 months or so, and then finally we get into the land of Thailand, and from there I stayed for another year and a half. Then I got admitted to a refugee camp, and they transferred me to Philippines, and I was in Philippines for 6 months.
And after the war began, the people began to struggle to survive. The amount of inflation increased as well as the amount of poverty. The Vietnamese were stripped of their economic freedom. Those who tried to flee or openly opposed the government were killed. During the war, the U.S. decided to use an herbicide they called Agent Orange. This herbicide was originally used to destroy the forests, so the North Vietnamese would not be able to hide there, but many problems were caused. The amount of cancer, skin diseases, and birth defects increased due to the amount of people who were exposed to this toxic chemical.
When the U.S. withdrew from the war, South Vietnam was left in communist hands. Vietnam is still a communist country today. The people of Vietnam have also lost many rights as well as privileges and freedom. Today, they do not even get a say in society.
If there is no war, nobody wants to leave the country. But it's worse. If we don't become refugees, and we are dead with the communists. So I'm glad that they
Many Vietnam refugees would agree that if there is no war, there are no refugees, as stated by Tu Le, who is not a refugee, but a Vietnamese veteran. Numerous refugees are grateful to have been able to flee to safer countries, and since Vietnam has recovered since then, the refugees are now able to return to their homeland. The main point of America jumping into the war was because they wanted to prevent the spread of communism, but they seem to have ignored what it would cost. Because of this, many soldiers were hurt and killed. America could not stop North Vietnam and their allies. However, they were able to prevent the spread of communism to the U.S. Both Vietnamese and American considered the war tragical, but not entirely. The war was the reason to the death of many lives, yet at the same time the start of many new lives.
As the daughter of a refugee, I, Emmy Nguyen, the daughter of Hoa Nguyen, am eternally grateful that I am able to live in a safe community. I know that there are many other people like my father. The Vietnam War took everything from my country, and it's a blessing that my parents were able to escape their once beautiful home. Even though its people do not have the same rights as us Americans have, Vietnam is still beautiful. It has recovered, however. Vietnam's name only brings the memory of the war. Vietnam is so much more than that. Vietnam is widely remembered for the Vietnam War rather than its inner culture. I am proud to say that Vietnam has fully, if not, almost recovered from its most horrible tragedy. The aroma of pho and spice now flood Vietnam's bustling markets instead of the thick smoke and strangled screams that once pierced the air years ago. Today, 40 years after the Vietnam War, Vietnam is a tourist-attracting country with rivers and beautiful bays. After the U.S. pulled out from the war, South Vietnam was left in the hands of communism and still remains communist today. With Vietnam's enchanting lands, it's a heavenly home compared to what it once was in 1975. However, unpleasant programs have been implemented. These programs are dangerous, and many died due to mine explosions, starvation, and diseases. Vietnam is still recovering, but for now, people should not ignore its triumphs and only see it as a waste of blood. Instead, they should admire its natural and man-made beauties.